Hello, everyone, and welcome to one of our final webinars for the 2020-2022 Public Lands Transportation Fellows Program. We have just a few logistics for you. Charlie, if you could go to the next slide, please. Today's webinar is going to be 1 hour long. It is being recorded and archived, so for the quality of the recording, we have everyone muted. We will hopefully have times at the very end for some question and answers. You can put your questions into the question pod over on the right-hand side at any time today. And when we do stop at the very end, I will ask those questions out loud to Charlie. And then if you have any technical issues or need to reach us for any reason, you can also put those in the question pod or in the chat pod directly for those of us who are working on the technical pieces. Next slide, please. So the goal of today's webinar is for Charlie to be able to document and archive the work that he did for the National Park Service Washington, D.C. Area Support Office from 2020 to 2022. He's going to go through some of his lessons learned, his tips and tricks, and the projects that he worked on, and how you can apply those to other National Park Service assignments. Next slide. Our introduction today, I'm going to just very briefly do an introduction to the program itself. Then his supervisor, Jen Miller, will be providing an introduction to the projects that he worked on. Charlie's going to go in depth into his projects, talk about some lessons learned and general suggestions, and then again, we'll do the question and answer. I did put this one picture on this slide for him. This is a project he will not be talking about today, but his fellow will be talking about in March. So I hope you'll join us for that presentation that will be coming up in March as well. Next slide, please. So our program, the Public Lands Transportation Fellows Program, began in 2012. It was modeled after the National Park Service Transportation Scholars Program, which I believe Jen will talk about just a little bit. Our program currently serves National Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It's a full-time paid fellowship with benefits, and the program, depending on which service you're working for, is a 12 to 24-month position with the possibility of extension and promotion. The locations are across the United States at national parks, national wildlife refuges, regional offices, or at headquarters. And we will be going into more detail about the program in a webinar tomorrow. So at the very end of Charlie's presentation today, he will be providing you with a link to our website for the Public Lands Transportation Fellows Program. And at that link, you can find the links to register for a general information session that will be held tomorrow and another one that will be held in January. If you're not able to attend either of those, they will both be recorded and posted to our website as well, because we are excited to announce that we will be opening the next class of fellows very soon, within the next couple weeks. And so this general information session will be a way you can find out more and how to apply. Next slide, please. The program, here's just some information for you about our fellows and what the program does. So it provides transportation planning support for national parks and national wildlife refuges, as I mentioned, helps develop transportation solutions that preserve valuable resources and enhance visitor experience. So it really gives you a way to work in the federal government, but also to make an impact. Allows you to work at different levels of federal government, and then allows you to work, learn, and grow through orientation, conferences, guest lectures, and mentorship. So we really help you work through all of this information and trying to learn about transportation and working for the federal government as well. And I hope you'll see that today in Charlie's presentation. Next slide. And at this time, I am excited to hand it over to Jen Miller, who is the Transportation Fee and National Scenic Byways Program Manager for the National Park Service Park Facility Management Division. And she's going to introduce why they've come back to the program for National Park Service and a little bit more about what Charlie's been doing. So Jen.
Thank you, Jamie. As Jamie mentioned, I'm Jen Miller, and one of the things I'll talk about today is adaptability of the fellows. And Charlie has had quite a number of areas that he's had to adapt to, and one of them is he had a prior Park Service mentor and supervisor, Steve Suter, who is on the phone today listening in, and so he's been mentoring Charlie along the way until the last few months. So, but I have the privilege of getting to introduce Charlie for this webinar. So that's great. And hopefully you'll get to see Steve here later in the presentation. As Jamie mentioned, welcome to the Transportation Fellows webinar. And I'm Jennifer Miller in the National Park Service Alternative Transportation Program, which is located in the Park Service headquarters office in Washington, D.C. Jamie had mentioned we're called the Washington office. We're supposed to be a support office, and we're responsible for policy guidance and assisting our regions and parks on any types of initiatives relative to alternative transportation and transportation. In 2001, the National Park Service had and implemented an alternative transportation, through the Alternative Transportation Program, what we called the Transportation Scholars Program. And that program was funded through the National Park Foundation and the Ford Motor Company. And it was quite a successful program from 2001 to 2016. Transportation scholars were placed in national parks across the country to work on projects with a focus on transportation planning, coordination with local communities, traffic studies, and other transportation-related tasks. In 2012, the Transit and Parks Technical Assistance Center used the Park Service model of the Transportation Scholars to expand what is now the Transportation Fellows Program into other federal land management agencies, which you're going to hear about during Charlie's presentation. Unfortunately, in 2016, the Park Service discontinued that Transportation Scholars Program, and we took quite a hiatus for several years from the program. But statistically, from 2001 to 2016, over 50 parks benefited from those transportation scholars. And many of those scholars went on to have very successful careers with the National Park Service, as well as other agencies such as Federal Highway Administration. Under Steve's leadership, and that's why I wanted to make sure that we recognize Steve as the head of Park Service Alternative Transportation Program, we recognize that in 2020 that the past success of the Transportation Scholars Program was such a good thing that we really wanted to bring that back to the Park Service. Fish and Wildlife Service had continued and had stayed active in having a fellows program. So in 2020, we reached out to Jamie and her group and said we'd like to have transportation scholars / fellows back. Sometimes you'll hear us call them scholars because we keep remembering it from the past. But when we move forward with the 2020 fellows program for the Park Service, there was an envisioned new approach to how the fellows would operate than what had previously been done with the scholars. And those two changes were that fellows would be brought to the headquarters and regional offices first to be able to gain overarching Park Service policy and guidance and understanding before being sent directly to a national park unit. And then secondly, that the fellows would be selected based on Park Service initiatives that we were looking to work on. And those 6 initiatives were transportation trails, transit systems, emerging mobility, infrastructure sustainability and resiliency, and transportation safety. The 3 transportation fellows selected would then go to field assignments based on one of those 6 initiatives. And you know, I was speaking about adaptability. We brought these 3 fellows on during a pandemic, and nobody could plan for what a pandemic was going to do to the work environment. But you know, so it was successful in that we had 3 fellows that were adaptable and could manage sort of some variability to the initial plan of their fellowship. And so with that, came some opportunities, and Charlie's going to speak about those opportunities. Being a transportation fellow is a wonderful opportunity, and sometimes I tease Pat and Charlie and say they got to do things in their fellowship I haven't gotten to do in 28 years of working for the National Park Service. So you know, there's some amazing experiences to be had, and assignments are located in some of the most pristine and beautiful places in America. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Charlie Gould, one of our 3 fellows. Charlie was selected as the Emerging Mobility Initiative Fellow, and he's going to present to you today on his experience and work with automated vehicle pilots, and he's currently working on a Michigan partnership around emerging mobility. So Charlie, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jen, and also thank you, Jamie. It is an honor and a privilege to be here today. Thank you all for showing up. So let's jump right into it. Why not? Just a quick introduction. You've heard all of this already. Some of you may know I'm from New Hampshire, live free or die, shout out to the 603. I went to University of Rochester and I have a degree in history. Kind of strange that I end up doing transportation planning, but it did have a concentration in history of trade and transportation. Let's look forward. The NPS Emerging Mobility Initiative is kind of interesting. In 2019, former Secretary of the Interior Zinke called for national parks to make innovative investments in our parks to enhance visitor experience. The idea being that national parks could become laboratories for new technologies. So in response to this, the transportation branch created a working group which would go about figuring out how to implement this set of goals. So what exactly is emerging mobility? Well, emerging mobility consists of shared alternatives to private automobiles. These can be electrified or human powered, and they're almost all integrated and accessed via smart technologies. The 5 emerging mobility technologies are automated vehicles, traveler information technologies, micromobility, ride hailing, and electric vehicles. So our automated vehicles here, you can see one cruising along on a scenic lakeshore drive in a national park of the future, are those in which some aspect of a safety critical function, that could be steering, the throttle, the braking, all occurs without direct driver input. There are 5 levels of automation. The ones that we implemented in national parks in 2021 were level 4 automated vehicles. Fun fact, you probably own a level 1 automated vehicle because that's what cruise control is. Let's look at these traveler information technologies. These are systems that provide real-time information to inform travelers about hazards and increase system efficiency. So the most common way to access this is with a smartphone. This includes the sort of ubiquitous wayfinding apps that almost everyone uses these days. But there's also bespoke solutions like the National Park Service app. And there's a kind of interesting back end to all of this, which is GTFS feeds, and basically backdoor pathways by which all of these different systems speak to each other. So the Park Service is interested in investing in those to tidy up those connections. So then we have micromobility. So these are shared fleets of low-speed human or electric powered vehicles. They include bike share, e-scooter services, also dockless e-bikes, and they're all typically accessed with a smartphone app. We actually have some good examples of these in the NPS. So many urban parks, including the National Mall in DC and Golden Gate National Recreation Area in San Francisco, have existing fleets of these already in use. And Yosemite National Park has actually set up their own with their nonprofit donor Pete's Coffee, footing the bill for some really splendid bike share bikes. Then we have ride hailing. Now, this is basically a taxi that you call with a smartphone. Dare I speak the brand names by which they go? It's as ubiquitous as Kleenex, referring to facial tissue. That is Uber and Lyft. These ones are kind of interesting. I personally have some doubts about the effectivity of these in national parks that relieving congestion, but they do pose very interesting opportunities for offering subsidized rides for those without cars. And the Park Service is currently working on a partnership with Lyft to establish designated pickup and drop-off zones at Indiana Dunes National Park. So electric vehicles, these are battery-powered vehicles. They replace internal combustion engine cars. They're not going to pull cars off the road, but they are going to make them cleaner, greener, and quieter, all of which have pretty clear benefits in national parks. They're already popping up at national parks across the country. There's still some questions about whether parks themselves can put them in. So that's something that's under current investigation. But there is a lot of interest in greening the National Park Service's large fleet of light-duty vehicles by electrifying them. So now we're going to get into my project. I am the fellow. Hello. I kind of broke this down into like 4 sections. So there's the automated shuttle pilots. We'll spend a good amount of time in that because that's kind of the real meat and potatoes, interesting stuff. But then the other emerging mobility work I've done, the partnership with the state of Michigan, and then also sort of a look into the future, which is the grant that I wrote and which was awarded by Federal Lands Highways Innovation and Research Council. So let's get right into the automated shuttle pilots. So we're going to start off with the planning phase, and this occurred simultaneously. The goals of these pilots were to demonstrate the use of automated shuttle technologies in public lands environments. And these were the first of their kind. There was not a previous set of pilots done in national parks or similar public lands, which meant that there were going to be unforeseen regulatory, organizational, and legal barriers to their deployment. There's also a lot of environmental barriers, and we'll get into that. And of course, at the end of the day, the mission statement of the Park Service is, oh, can I recite it? No, I can't. Okay, but it's all about the visitors and their experience. So here we have our 2 parks. They're very different parks. We have Wright Brothers National Memorial on the Outer Banks of North Carolina that commemorates the historic first flight of the Wright Brothers. And then Yellowstone National Park, which is America's oldest national park and one of the largest in the lower 48. One of these was grant funded, that was Yellowstone. The other one was a partnership with the North Carolina Department of Transportation. So kind of interesting differences in the business models there. My work, this was the first 6 months on the job, and kind of in addition to learning acronyms and learning people's names, I helped sort of facilitate the coordination between the 2 teams. I participated in a site visit to Wright Brothers in December of 2020. December of 2020. There you go. And assisted with the risk assessment process, prepared some maps, and helped design the rider survey. Just so you know, you're going to see a lot of these 4-letter acronyms. A lot of them are for parks. So WRBR, that's Wright Brothers. It's the first 2 letters of Wright and Brothers. And that's a pattern that you'll see throughout. I'll point out, usually I'll spell out the park name long form first. But if you see something like that, like Yell is Yellowstone, because that's 1 word. MEMA is Minute Man, 2 different words. So just keep an eye out for those. You can actually decode them. It's kind of a fun game. All right, so let's look at our parks. And again, like I said, these are really different. The 1903 flight of the Wright Brothers happened on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It was actually at Kill Devil Hills, not Kitty Hawk, fun fact. The shuttle goes around the base of Great Kill Devil Hill. The trade name for this shuttle was the Connected Autonomous Shuttle Supporting Innovation, or CASI, very spiffy. We only ran 1 shuttle on this route. It was a 1.5-mile loop. So it is pancake flat because it's a barrier island. It is windy. In the summer, it got kind of hot, but the schedule was actually done such that the shuttle wasn't running during the hottest part of the season, which was very fortunate. And the shuttle used was an EasyMile EZ10 Gen 3. Also, note that weather conditions like a storm blowing in prevented the shuttle from operating. Whenever there are particles flying through the air, could be leaves, could be snow, could be rain, the shuttles do not like that. Their LiDAR senses that, and it spooks them like a horse. And then they have to stop. They get really skittish. They can't navigate if there's anything flying around in the air. So that's a thing to keep in mind with these, and we'll get into that further. So here's what I did at Wright Brothers. I was the point of contact between the CASI team and the Transdev operators. Oftentimes there wasn't a National Park Service person on site. So I was kind of the go-between there. I created this brochure you're seeing to the right, which informed visitors about the CASI pilot and kind of gave them the rundown. Please don't, cut off the vehicle. Please, ride the vehicle. So sort of a mix of everything. I also helped with the social media strategy. And a fun thing I did was I reported on the pilot to the Federal Lands Highways annual business meeting from the field in front of CASI, which was a great kind of like live action shot to what's normally a pretty dry affair. So Yellowstone National Park, on the other hand, is the oldest national park in the US. It's iconic, it's well known, you've probably heard of it before. The electric driverless demonstration in Yellowstone, or Teddy, is what we called the shuttles. So we have Cassie and Teddy, very cute. There were 2 routes and 2 shuttles. So the 2 shuttles would run 1 route for the first part of the deployment and 1 route for the second part of the deployment. And they happened in the Canyon Village area, which was north of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. So Yellowstone could not be more different from Wright Brothers. One of them's at sea level. Yellowstone's at 8,000 feet. It's on a plateau, higher than any point east of the Mississippi. Snowdrifts delayed launch by several weeks. So that happened in like late May, early June. It was cold. And very hilly. That hilly route drained the batteries like nobody's business. Fortunately, the wildlife did not interfere with the shuttle. That is a famous aspect of Yellowstone National Park, and the area that the Park Service chose was actually chosen in part because there weren't a whole lot of bison or bears. And then there is the Local Motors Ollie 1.0 shuttles that Teddy operated. So what I did here, a lot of the similar stuff. I was the point of contact between the Teddy team and the BEEP operators. On this pilot, I almost always was the only one on the ground. I compiled reports on the survey. I reported on daily operations to the NPS team whenever things went wrong. I was calling up Steve or Lynn from the park and saying, hey, something's going on here. I need you guys over here. After an incident, a group from NHTSA, that's the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency, showed up. And so I had to brief them on everything that was going on the site. And here is me operating the lovely Teddy shuttle. It's very fun to drive. These are just kind of a rundown. If you want to like take a picture with your phone, I'm not going to get into all of it. It's basically what I told you. Yeah, let's get into the evaluation. So we have a mixed method approach. We've got some data from the shuttles, that's disengagement reports. So every time the shuttle stopped working and had to be taken over manually. Then we also have survey responses. That's pretty great. I helped set up that survey and helped run it. Some limitations. The survey response rate was wicked low. It was not necessarily what you'd want. Like we're talking 3 to 5% between the 2 pilots. Also, per ride data wasn't collected by the vendors. So, you've got daily data, but not the per ride stuff. And then the entire first month of data from Yellowstone is missing. So let's really get into it. Everything, you got to take it with a grain of salt, but I do believe that this data reflects what we saw. The vehicle performance. So both pilots had multiple days of partial or complete service suspension. That's important to keep in mind. These were not running all of the time, but they were running most of the time, which is good. And Yellowstone had more days of partial service because they had another shuttle they could fall back on. And you can see here, this is a Teddy with a hole in it. Someone has backed into it. Teddy kind of got a little roughed up a couple times in the parking lot there. Disengagements, We see a higher rate of disengagements on the CASI pilot, but if you look at the section of data that survives from the lodge route, which is the portion that went missing on the Teddy pilot, you can see that the Teddy had a higher rate of disengagements when operating in a mixed traffic parking lot environment. But very consistently, these are happening on parking lots, high volume pedestrian crossings, and much less so on roadways and the back roads in the Yellowstone campground. Performance challenges, we'll get into each one of these in turn. Connectivity, okay, so having internet is really great for these shuttles, but it's not critical. You can do it without it. Yellowstone's BEEP team coped with this by physically mailing hard drives to their Florida command center every other day. That gets expensive, that gets difficult. That's not great for, like, you know, being able to tweak things in real time, but it's what they did and they made do with it. I will say that RTK, that's real-time kinematic, is required. So that's triangulated, highly precise GPSs. Gotta have those or the shuttles won't run. For charging, so both pilots ended up needing additional unplanned midday charging stints. Keep in mind, you probably are familiar with this if you have an older cell phone. Whatever it says the battery life is on the box, that's not always true. And that was very true of these shuttles. The battery life on paper and in practice proved to be very difficult, very dependent on the weather, very dependent on the terrain. So knowing these things, I think looking back, kind of preparing for that ahead of time would have been really great. Level 2 fast chargers are ideal, but level 1 chargers do work. Just a great photo to bring your attention to on the right. We have the improvised shuttle chargers in the Canyon Village, which were designed in disguise as electric boxes, so Tesla drivers wouldn't hook up to them. Excuse me. Here's a kind of interesting thing. If you're in the business of automated shuttles or looking to employ one wherever you may be, note, they follow a very consistent pathway. And this is kind of cool, you know, it runs on a virtual rail and it sticks to that rail every single time. But you notice that it keeps running over the same spots again and again and again. And if you have faulty pavement, it will run over that. But because it keeps doing it on the nose every single time, you get very consistent wear patterns. You can see in that top picture where the Teddy is running over the same pothole again and again, and that got worse and worse over the course of the pilot. So, you know, if you've got faulty pavement, it's gonna wear it out. The other critical thing here is landscaping. You've got to maintain your landscaping. On both pilots, people had to go out with scissors to trim the grass. Blowing vegetation on the side of the road, tree branches in a breeze, anything like that, the shuttle will interpret it as a threat. They don't have object detection, or they have detection, they don't have object identification. So they don't know what that thing that's moving towards them is, and that'll freak them out. So having a nice, like, you know, meter plus clearance on either side is really important. And along with that, any change in road conditions, that would be stormwater, sedimentation, snow accumulation, or melt, all of that is really important to control to the degree possible. Okay, so let's look at our ridership. Each one of these pilots did have really high ridership, particularly Teddy. Your eyes do not deceive you. More than 10,000 people rode on the Teddy shuttles. So that's really exciting. You know, that's an overwhelming success right there. All right. One more performance challenge, and that's the parking lots. These shuttles, they just don't do well here. If you think about how complex a parking lot is, the tiny micro social interactions between drivers, pedestrians, you know, the wildlife that lives in parking lots, like squirrels and ravens in the case of Yellowstone. All of these factors swimming around, everybody's going to their cars, going to get an ice cream, carrying an ice cream, walking back to their car. They might be walking a little odd because they're balancing it on the cone. All of these things need to be accounted for, and the shuttles just aren't at the point where they can do that. I do think with revolutions coming in AI image detection and the increased power of AI, it's likely that in the future, they'll be better prepared to deal with that. But in the parking lots twice, cars did back into Teddy shuttles, which put them out of commission for a little bit. Okay, so let's look at the rider survey. There were 10 questions. They were accessed via QR code that worked decently at Wright Brothers, that did not work decently at Yellowstone. Very hard to access that when the internet is terrible. So only 2 to 5% of riders completed the survey. Just a quick note, go back and watch this if you work in a federal land management agency and you want a tip on how to get a survey approved quicker. The customer feedback survey format is very liberating, and we're very lucky that the social scientist at Yellowstone knew about that. Here's our survey results. Most people had a good time. That's awesome. We like to see that. Most people rode it for fun, though more people at Wright Brothers rode the shuttle for a valid transportation purpose, more than just fun. It was more than just Disneyland. In part, that's because the shuttles actually went somewhere people wanted to go at Wright Brothers. It went to the First Flight Memorial, and it was around the primary resource, that beautiful monument on Great Kill Devil Hill. Yellowstone, most people who were riding these shuttles weren't staying in the campground and weren't staying in the lodges. They were riding them because they were cool. And even in that regard, they were successful. Safety perception. This is kind of cool. We get a before and after here, and we can see that across the board, this was improving people's perception of safety. I will say there's definitely a bit of bias in here. Most of the people, like the vast majority of people who rode the shuttles or who filled out the forms, did ride the shuttles. Which means that people who thought they were too unsafe to ride didn't answer this question. But among the brave, we see even then an improvement. So the other great thing here, just an increase across the board in support for pilots. People thought these were awesome. They want to see more. And then just here's some great feedback. This was super popular with kids. People did notice they had a kind of herky-jerky way about them. That was not super popular with riders, but also kind of forgiven because it's an experimental technology. People were happy that the attendants were on board. The attendants ended up being very popular. So there was always an operator on board, and these people became knowledgeable. They became kind of our customer service reps. They learned about the park and were telling people about things to do. So that was a hit. Okay, and then let's get into the public engagement real quick. So if you're doing a launch event on one of these things, we had two different philosophies. Wright Brothers, it was right-sized. So basically it was kept as quiet as possible up until the launch day. And then launch day was just for the press and dignitaries. On the other hand, Yellowstone, made sure to call up all the regional press. The AP was there. Basically, they tried to create buzz, and the result was actually pretty successful. We had people coming in from across the country who said they'd heard about this, and this became, something they wouldn't have stopped in the Canyon Village, I heard, if there wasn't this cool shuttle to ride on. So this was something that generated a lot of interest, and we actually had a congresswoman from Illinois and a congressman from Montana come and ride on the shuttles and give favorable reviews. Here's our challenges. They were popular with the people who rode them. They were not as popular with other road users. They created some kind of sort of congestion issues. There's actually a great anecdote from Wright Brothers about a walker who would walk every day around the memorial. That was his standard daily exercise loop. And he wrote a very angry response to the Wright Brothers staff saying that the shuttle was following him, and he demanded this stop at once. And the issue was he was walking at a normal, walking pace, and the shuttle doesn't have the ability to pass him. He was walking where the shuttle likes to drive. And so the shuttle was following a couple feet behind him, just slowly, slowly, slowly. So they had to put up signs saying, please yield to the shuttle, please get out of its way, it cannot pass you. And that did resolve that situation. So, all right, our successes. So the high ridership, the survey results, these all indicate a very strong level of public engagement. Anecdotal conversations were very positive, and this was a valuable educational opportunity. Again, like I said before, kids in particular thought this was rad. We heard again and again, just like these kind of glowing praise of this wicked cool thing that people really enjoyed. All right, so lessons learned, specificity in contracts. This was a big one in Yellowstone. Making sure that everything you expect from the contract is written out in plain language. You got contracting officers on the scene before you even issue the request for information, the request for projects. That's huge. Planning extra time for on-the-ground setup. Whatever the minimum quote for that is, add 50% to it, because it takes a bit to get these going. Anticipate technology issues and service disruptions. This is really important. I think, understanding that you are piloting a new technology is really key to planning around this. At the same time, something that we've heard from talking after the fact with other automated vehicle companies is, well, the short windows in which these were operating wasn't really long enough to work out all of the kinks. So for a longer deployment, there might be more of an opportunity to really address some of these problems before they get too severe. Adapt to changing conditions. Conditions change. If you're in a temperate climate and working with a company from Florida, they don't have the same concept of seasons. Hurricane's not going to come through, but a blizzard might. And then just emphasize accessibility and user friendliness whenever possible. This is a new generation of transportation technologies. There's no reason they shouldn't all be built to the highest standards of accessibility for people with disabilities, for minority groups. Everyone should feel welcome and comfortable on these. They should not pose an undue risk to vulnerable populations. We want these to solve problems, not to create more problems. So making sure you're pursuing products that achieve that highest standard of equity is key. All right, so future pilots will not replicate these two pilots. They may explore different service types, vehicle formats, maybe bigger, maybe smaller, maybe freight, who knows, garbage. I always thought that'd be kind of cool. And the NPS is hopeful that in the future, and we'll hear a little more about that, to implement more permanent installations. Okay, so let's get into the partnership with the state of Michigan. This one's really exciting. And this is up and coming. It is currently happening and ongoing. So we have a memorandum of understanding. That's what MOU stands for. This is sort of a timeline for this. Michigan actually reached out to the NPS in response to the RFI for the automated shuttles. And they've been talking about the potential for a partnership since sometime in 2020. And now, as of April 22, that partnership is on paper and signed, and planning is underway for a bunch of exciting stuff. So basically, there's some joint agreements here. We want all the benefits of emerging mobility technology, that's sustainability, better accessibility, ameliorating traffic congestions, and also improving transportation safety along the way. There's also some kind of interesting bonus ones, namely the state of Michigan, their Office of Future Mobility and Electrification is actually housed under their Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So this is also an economic development initiative. Michigan put the world on wheels, and they want to maintain that status. And then the NPS has also sort of doubled down on the Biden administration's commitment to equity, that is the Justice 40 commitments. So looking for equitable opportunities for Americans of all types. So let's look at our national parks in Michigan real quick, and I'm just going to give you the run over on them. You don't need to memorize all this. You can take pictures if you like, or you can review the webinar later and learn. Sleeping Bear Dunes is the biggest by visitation. It is a national lakeshore. It's very sort of recreationally focused, but it does have a wilderness dimension. It is very popular. If you've met a Michigander, they've probably been to Sleeping Bear Dunes. They will tell you about sledding down Great Sleeping Bear Dune. It sounds wicked cool. I haven't done it, but it looks like a good time. It's got extensive front country resources, and it's actually linked seasonally by transit and trails to the nearby city of Traverse City. So huge opportunities there, a lot can be done. Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore is more remote than Sleeping Bear. It's a very high visitation park as well, but all of that visitation is kind of concentrated around the town of Munising, which is in the far western edge of the park. Kind of interesting thing about Pictured Rocks is every February they have an ice climbing festival. It's the largest in North America. It's called Ice Fest. It draws ice climbers from around the world. So there's an interesting like wintertime dimension there as well. River Raisin National Battlefield has a more moderate visitation, where the others were in the 1.x millions. This one's around 218,000. Most of that goes to a boat ramp, which is a little removed from the park. This is a historical park. The other two are more naturally, recreationally focused. It is in the town of, the city of Monroe, which is pretty much dead in the middle between Detroit and Toledo, Ohio. So, you know, ex-industrial area, you've got lovely views of smokestacks that very much appeal to me, but they're kind of restoring that battlefield landscape there. Isle Royale National Park is perhaps the polar opposite. Now, only 25,000 people a year go here. It is the oldest national park in Michigan. It is the most wild. It's probably one of the wildest and most remote in the lower 48 United States. 98% of the park is wilderness. There are 2 developed areas. They're very small. Big challenge there right now is all of the electricity in the park needs to be generated by burning diesel fuel and generators, and that has to all be shipped in on a boat. So that's not ideal for a kind of electric mobility demo, especially because most of the micromobility, devices, the emerging mobility devices that we're looking at are actually forbidden in wilderness areas. Anything there would be very costly and difficult. And then lastly, we got Keweenaw National Historic Park. This one's pretty new, 2016. It is rural, but it is developed. It's a bunch of small towns and disparate sites. The land owned by the park is a lot smaller than the actual heritage area, which has a bunch of private and nonprofit museums and trails, and it's all interconnected by a set of snowmobile motorcycle trails that are very cool. So let's just look real quick at what we're planning. Prioritizing pilots here, it's all about timing, effort, cost, and viability. There's a couple of sort of waves we're looking at. There's the quick wins, which is the stuff that can just be put on the ground tomorrow, stroke of a pen, the money exists for it, the infrastructure exists for it. These will appear in the next year. There will probably be an emerging mobility demonstration at the Ice Fest in Munising, that's Pictured Rocks. Something exciting that will come to Pictured Rocks and then Sleeping Bear is expanding their fleet of all-terrain electric wheelchairs. And these are like electric wheelchairs with tank treads that can go over rough terrain. So they're very popular, kind of cool cutting edge accessibility technology, and then just expanding EV charging across the board. The priority projects, these are the longer term, bigger ticket items, but the ones we're really getting excited about. Maybe there was going to be an AV, automated vehicle, and transit expansion at Sleeping Bear. That would be really cool. It's going to be high cost. It's going to require more infrastructure, but has the potential to be one of the first long-term deployments of automated vehicles in the US. And then micromobility options at Pictured Rocks, Sleeping Bear, and Keweenaw. Could it be bike shares? Could it be e-bikes? Could it be e-snowmobiles? We're looking at all the options. Then we've got our kind of long-range slow burners, and these are going to be the projects that take a while, take significant effort and commitment. Transitioning all of the service vehicles there to EVs. Decarbonizing electricity infrastructure at Isle Royale. I'm very interested in that one. What can we do to get those diesel generators off the island and find a better solution? And improving the internet connectivity in and around these parks. That is a high priority that's going to have a huge positive impact, but is not going to come cheap, and it's going to take some effort. Now we're going to transition to the sort of EM stuff that I did throughout the NPS. I participated in the Emerging Mobility Working Group subgroups. I performed site visits, and I specifically helped Acadia National Park with some transportation planning stuff. These subgroups, they consist of members from NPS, the DOT Volpe Center, They specialize in specific ones of the EM technologies. They do a lot of outreach. So like the automated vehicles subgroup, for example, has just concluded a round of interviews talking with basically every major provider of automated vehicles in the country and getting a sense of what they can do, what they're looking to do, and what the opportunities would be for them in the national parks. Traveler information technologies is also just like blazing ahead with some really impressive stuff. These are the site visits I did, and I am moving at an accelerated rate. Want to get those questions in. I will not read the name of all of these parks, but you can see there's quite a few of them. These are the ones that I met the staff of and took official tours of. More of that will be available in my reports. I'm doing a little biopsy on all of them. So here's some general observations about parks from the site visits. Park leadership, which has a vision for the park and sort of high-level, long-range goals, performs really well. I've got a picture here of Little Round Top at Gettysburg. I think of all of the parks I went to, they had really just some outstanding management practices, a clear vision of what they wanted to do. They were working on improvements on forwarding that. They had a massive nonprofit associated with them helping fund that. And it was really impressive seeing all of these pieces come together for a fantastic, fantastic visitor experience. The other really key portion is to maintain good relationships with the gateway communities. These are the communities that are attached to or within or just outside of the national parks, private communities, just like your hometown. A good relationship with the gateway community is vital. Some national parks are big enough that they feel like they can kind of, work outside of the constraints of the gateway community, but you really need the cooperation of those gateway community members in order to have a successful national park. The last item, busy parks need to think critically and creatively about how to control car traffic on the roadways. Parks like Yosemite, Glacier, Zion have restricted cars. Parks like Yellowstone have not restricted cars and so have endemic and severe traffic jams. So let's just look really quickly at Acadia. I visited here in December of 2021. The park leadership, specifically John Kelly, the management assistant, took me on a tour of the park, introduced me to various people, including the nonprofit transit provider there. And I was given 2 priority items to work on by the park, which was evaluating the cost of electrifying the Island Explorer bus system, and then also trying to fix the congestion at the Bass Harbor Head Light Station. So the electrification of buses, Steve Suter, my former supervisor, identified an opportunity for a study by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, that's NREL. And so that was the move that was taken or suggested. They could do a better economic analysis than I could, that's for sure. That's their job, not necessarily mine. There was a Maine DOT survey done in July of 2022, but no further action was taken pursuing the NREL study. And then at Bass Harbor Head Light Station, I wrote several draft proposals for a study, a lot of variation between them. I had a lot of help from my mentor, Phil Shapiro. These also were not pursued further by the park, and that was kind of discouraging. I think there may be further efforts in 2023 to find better transportation alternatives. But the lessons learned here, if you're gonna do a project, you really need to be on top of the communications. You need to advocate for it at every step along the way. You gotta build a team. Don't try and tackle it alone. I think this is where I went most wrong. I tried to do it myself because I didn't have access to the human resources to really build that team, and I didn't do the communication necessary to make sure that these moving parts were moving along the way. And then, recognizing the extent of the task and the ask is really important. We'll get into more of that just a little bit later. I promise we're almost done. So let's look at the path forward real quick. This is going to be my next 2 years. We're focusing on multimodal equity in addition to the State of Michigan partnership. This multimodal equity grant is pretty interesting. I wrote this in July of 2022. The goal is to work with underserved communities to create and evaluate digital tools which connect them with local public lands using existing transportation infrastructure. I didn't memorize that pitch, I'm a speed reader. This was awarded $460,000 by Federal Lands Highways. I'm gonna be the principal investigator on that. It's going to be community-led, community-oriented, and I'm not going to be the project manager, but I'm going to be working closely with the project manager to see that happen according to best practices. Finally, the conclusion. Look, I knew this was going to take a bit. So lessons learned. Okay, number one, people are everything. That's probably true in every job, but your relationships decide whether you succeed or fail. This is key. Communicate regularly with everyone you work with. I would say be kind, get personal. Like, professional detachment is great and all, but you want to know the people you're working with. You need their trust and support when you're struggling. Stay in touch with those you've worked with in the past. A network is something that is much lauded these days. I would define that as the group of people who are pleased to hear your name. They smile when you come up in conversation. You want that level of recognition and that positive association. And then seek mentorship from the wise and experienced. This is very important. The key to getting good mentors is to ask questions. Asking questions signals your respect and your appreciation for the knowledge of a potential mentor. Okay, this one's huge. Phil Shapiro has heard this in probably every single PLTF webinar ever. Under promise and over deliver. It's practically his catchphrase. This may be counterintuitive if you are like me and a salesman and an interviewee. You like to sell people the moon. You cannot do that in planning. You need to know specifically what question was asked before you answer it. And know that the person asking the question may not understand that question either. Katie has a great example of this. I was asked to do something which I thought I understood, and the people asking the question thought they understood. And it was only once we were a month into this planning process where we realized that the ask was much, much bigger than either group realized. And if you don't know, just ask. That's crucial. And lastly, and this one's from Steve Suter, my former mentor. On the first day of the job, he told me that all the easy work has already been done, and that has proven true. Opportunities are always within reach, but great opportunities can only be accessed through great work. And so with that, we got to thank you. Take a picture if you want to see your name. Might be in there, who knows. These are some resources. These are links that can be clicked. They can also be Googled. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Wow, Charlie, as always, you were a very engaging speaker. I'm sure everybody learned a lot. And I am impressed that you were able to get through that number of slides that quickly. So I'm just going to give you a shout out for that. Very impressive. So for those of you who are joining us, it is time to ask questions. As I mentioned earlier, for quality of the recording, we have you guys all muted, but you may use that question pod over on the right-hand side. So if anyone wants to throw some questions in there, I'll ask those out for Charlie. And as we give you guys a few minutes to go ahead and put any of those in that you may have, Charlie, the first question for you is, which park is your favorite?
My favorite park is Badlands National Park. The thing that I love about Badlands is while there are options for staying on the trail and there are options for driving, a lot of it is very wild. And unlike some wildernesses where they ask that you stay on the trail, Badlands kind of lets you do whatever. That environment is constantly eroding. And so on my way out west, I had a wonderful experience running away from what I thought might be a flash flood down a canyon, jumping over quicksand, and making it out by the skin of my teeth. And I felt like Indiana Jones. It's really cool. It also just like that terrain symbolizes everything I'd ever imagined of the West when I was a kid. So seeing that with my own eyes and realizing it was real was stunning.
And how about, what are you looking forward to the most about the next part of your fellowship and continuing on?
I am fantastically excited to see the multimodal equity project take shape. I think it's going to be really, really cool actually like getting out in those communities and talking to the people who we're trying to work with, getting a sense of what they want from their public lands experience. The other thing that I am thrilled for is what exactly we're going to see out of Michigan. I think the opportunities there are vast.
We had another question come in for you that would like to know, in the future, how do you think you could collect more surveys in locations that have little to no internet connectivity? Do you have any recommendations or suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, old stalwart paper and pencil does always work. I think there's concerns about generating litter there. Those definitely came up during the planning process. Potentially having like survey managers with iPads and then collecting that data in offline mode. So like having sort of closed circuit internal storage collection of some kind would be kind of cool. This wouldn't work for any kind of big survey, but I think of the buttons that the TSA has when you make it through. It's like, was this a happy face TSA day or a frowny face TSA day? It's definitely something that needs work. Smartphones are great. I think, as a young guy and someone who hasn't lived extensively in rural areas, I do over rely on them. So planning the next round of surveys as that comes up, and it will, that's going to be a question we're going to have to address. If you've got any ideas, let me know.
Another question from an attendee is, what was the most rewarding part of the Fellows program?
I think the most rewarding part of the Fellows program, I'm going to have to take it back to the people. I'm going to single out one very specific group of people. Know that the amazing part is going, anyone can go to a national park. Not everyone gets to meet the park staff and learn about what the national park is to them and what that means. Every park I've been to, they've taken me to like, oh, this is somewhere the visitors don't know about. It's not on the map, but it's really cool. And they're like, no pictures, just enjoy it. I mean, it's amazing. I can't even tell you, it's so cool. But I think something really interesting that I appreciated from previous jobs and appreciate here too is the level of institutional knowledge that it would be very hard to pass on, and it needs to be passed on through apprenticeship and word of mouth. I joke that there's always some old guy with a gray beard and a ponytail in every national park who's keeping the lights on. And getting to meet those guys and getting just a scrap of their wisdom, like they'll blow you away with things, like always a surprise. So that's something I really appreciate.
And you may not have a question or an answer for this one because it may be what you just answered about getting to see some of those special locations in the parks. But for most of our fellows, even though this is the Transportation Fellows program, they get to do some things outside of transportation while they're in the parks and the refuge, something really cool that unless you were working there, you wouldn't necessarily get to do. So have you had any of those experiences, anything that you got to do in a park that wasn't necessarily transportation related, but was pretty neat?
Yes. A really cool one was going up the Bodie Island Lighthouse at Cape Hatteras National Seashore. It was closed for COVID, and so me, Steve, and Mike Colopy, who's the park facilities manager, took a meeting up there, and that was just like super cool. We're up on this like 200-foot lighthouse. We can see all of the Outer Banks out around us, and it's just the three of us on a Teams call. That was wicked neat.
That sounds like a lot of fun. So thank you for presenting today. If you can move us to the next slide, I'm going to go ahead and get us wrapped up because we have about a minute left. Perfect. So for those of you who attended, if you have any questions, we have here on the slide contact information for Jen and Charlie, and then also for myself for the program. Again, just a reminder, if you are interested in applying for the program, We do have some informational sessions, webinars that will be going on. The first one will be tomorrow, and the second one will be at the beginning of January. Again, we are opening the applications for the next cohort of both NPS and Fish and Wildlife Service fellows, and those will be opening here within the next few weeks. So keep an eye out on our website. If you want to learn more, as Charlie mentioned too, this was recorded and will also be posted on that website under the 2020-2022 Fellows piece. And one more time, just a fantastic job, Charlie, and I'm super impressed that you got all of that information into this 1 hour webinar. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.